Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I very much appreciate coming out in the rain on a weeknight, Thursday night, no less, right? Shabbat coming. And I very much appreciate the time that we can spend. So, the title, I don't remember the exact title, but the title of the class or the talk tonight is Being Jewish Right Now, and the light of Hanukkah, right? So connecting it essentially to Hanukkah. And what I'd like to share is from kind of recent experiences in my involvement with Jewish students. I'm in the middle now of a university tour in the UK. So I'm going around the universities around the country, speaking to students at university, and I'm spending time with them, right? So I'm listening to kind of their experiences, what they're dealing with, and what they're thinking. Among the things that are kind of like very front and centered in focus for people, certainly students in university, is anti-Semitism. That's front and center. But it's also a question of their Jewish identity, right? What does it mean for us to be Jewish today, right? What is that, right? And so what may be very evident for us in a community and where, it's very, very strong and there's kind of a certain level of clarity as to kind of what it is we're doing. This morning I prayed Shachrit on the third floor of Bet Torah. It's as I understand, a Flatbush run minyan, so it's like under the radar. I understand it's not on the Bet Torah schedule, it's just kind of like up there. But it was one of the most inspirational things I've experienced in a very long time, because I think there was one person besides me in that minyan that was over 40. Everybody else was 19, 20 years old. And they were running it themselves, reading Torah themselves, the halachot themselves. And it was just beautiful. I mean, just running like so nicely. And for me, it was inspirational. I mean, really, it inspired me for the rest of the day. But that is not typical. The truth of the matter is that I was sitting in that room this morning, looking around, and I honestly can tell you I have not seen that almost ever. Outside of a youth minyan on Shabbat or something like that, but on a Thursday morning at 7:30, that these young people are getting at, that's, to me, very hopeful. It means something. But it's not what I usually see. And I would be willing to say it's not what you usually see. I could be wrong and you'll tell me, but I don't think that's normally the case. So, in my experience, there is this question about what does it mean for us to be Jewish today? And for some people, right, it may just be self-evident. But what I'm saying is that for many young people, it is not self-evident. And there is so much static in the air that is destructive to the clarity that it is a serious question. Now, I don't intend to answer that tonight, right? I'm not going to be so presumptive that I can spend, 35, 40 minutes and say this is what we do. This is what it is. What I can try to do is to look at why it's important to actually consider these things. To be able to recognize that the question is not a silly question, right? To be able to recognize that questioning what does it mean for us to be Jewish? What are the components of our Judaism? Is not a silly question. And it is something that I think that we need to speak about. So really what I'm going to do, try to do tonight, is to kind of get that ball rolling, right? To kind of signal a trajectory. And of course you are entirely free to accept it or not, or kind of, follow it or not and say, yeah, it's not for me, that's fine. But here it is, and I present it to you. I'm going to start with Hanukkah. And the reason I'm going to start with Hanukkah is not just because it's on Sunday night. It's a great opportunity to be able to discuss this. So it's an impetus for me to kind of do this subject. And the opening thing with regards to Hanukkah is this. The reality is that it's kind of odd that we celebrate it. That the Hachamim decided that this is something that we should celebrate. And I'll tell you why. Right? Why is it odd? It's odd because if we look at it in terms of kind of political value, right, in terms of national value, it is true that what we were able to do in our rebellion against the Greek presence, or whatever it is that you want to call it, oppression, and so on. I know I'm covered. I feel like I need to back up. Yeah, they're telling me this. In terms of the Greek oppression, is that we won a war and everything deteriorated from there, for all intents and purposes. It's true that it took a couple centuries, but the reality is that from the point that we won the war, it was really just downhill. It was slowly downhill. But we had foreign authorities, Syrians coming in, right? Greek-Syrian officials coming in, having, political maneuver and influence on what was happening to the people that were in charge. You will have heard perhaps the Kohanim Gedolim of the second Beit HaMikdash were not exactly, the pinnacles of upright service. They was highly politicized. They were very controlled by political movements and so on. And it ends up resulting in the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. So Hanukkah is not like, this was an amazing achievement. We have solidified ourselves in hell. Even the achievement itself, it's true that we were able to achieve local autonomy. It wasn't even throughout the entirety of Eretz Israel. It was local essentially to Yerushalayim and outskirts of Yerushalayim. We were able to control the position of the Beit HaMikdash, meaning the area of the Beit HaMikdash. But it was not wholly autonomous and sovereign. We had the sovereignty, but it was very politically influenced from outside forces. So, what is it about Hanukkah that the Hachamim decided, something, we're going to set this in the calendar? And Hanukkah is one of those festivals. It's basically Purim and Hanukkah that obviously is rabbinically established. And the Hachamim say about these two festivals that they're not going anywhere. Not that the other ones are going anywhere, but they say these are two are going to be highlighted when the others are going to be kind of dimmed in terms of how it is that we deal with them later on in our future. So what is it about Hanukkah? So I want to suggest what about Hanukkah was so important and why the Hachamim saw that there is something in it that was significant, that needed to be marked, established in the calendar, and celebrated yearly. What we also don't always have consciousness of around Hanukkah is that we are used to thinking about it as the Jews against the Greeks. And that's pretty simple, right? It's a pretty simple way of looking at it. But the reality is it's not quite the Jews against the Greeks. First of all, when we say the Jews against, the majority of Jews were not interested in fighting the Greeks. It was not like, that's how it's usually told. The Jewish people were oppressed, and the Greeks were pushing them against the wall, and we got up and fought our war. The reality is that the majority of Jews, like the Greeks, they wanted to be the Greeks. They were Hellenized. Yeah? Hellenization, right? The definition of a Hellenist is an individual who is not formally of Greek descent, but espouses nonetheless Greek culture, Greek thought, Greek life. If you look at the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the entry says after that, especially Jews. Because they loved this, right? So the Jews were the biggest fans of Greek life, thought, culture. They were happy. And that in and of itself is significant. Because it is the first time in Jewish history that mass amounts of Jews are willing to relinquish their own native identity and culture and thought and replace it with what Greece was bringing. Never before in Jewish history was that an issue. We had dabbled in foreign worship, right? We had a bunch of other gods that were running around us, and we like to play around with other gods, every now and then we're mischievous that way. God didn't like it very much. He keeps saying, stop already. I'm a jealous God. I don't want you going to other gods. I'm going to press you on it. And we get pressed, and we pray. They say, okay, we'll come back. And that's the cycle of all of the prophets. You look through all of the Nevi'im, that's basically what goes on. But it is not the people of Israel saying, we are leaving everything that we have in our to become worshippers of Dagon or Baal. That does not happen. If at all anything happens, it's like Eliyahu Nabi says to them, how long are you going to ride the fence? How long are you going to be sitting in both camps? Worshipping one and worshipping the other, and coming back home after you go on your excursions, and coming back for Shabbat dinner after you've been out, wherever it is you've been out. Choose. That's what Eliyahu Nabi says. The situation of Hanukkah is entirely different. The situation of Hanukkah is the Jewish people saying, I think we're done. We're not interested in this anymore. The Greeks have, for the first time ever, experienced sophistication of thought that is unrivaled in the entire world, except maybe by us at the time. Right? So, it's true. We are living examined lives as Jewish people by this time, without question. Right? The Torah prompts us to examine life. Right? All you have to do is read cursorily the Torah Shebichtav, and it's saying to you, pay attention to your life. Do good. Live a good life. Nobody else is saying that. Right? Everything else, any other legal code that we know of in the ancient world is saying, don't steal, because you'll have your hand cut off, or whatever it is, right? To be able to hold society together. But it's not necessarily saying, look at your life, consider the trajectory, how are you living, what does your life mean? That Torah prompts us to do. And the only other people in the world that were doing that were Greek. The Greek philosophers. So in Greece, you have people like Socrates that are asking, what is the good life? How should we live morally? What is the best thing that we should do for our life? What determines what is right in life? That's brand new. Nobody's doing that. Except us. If you go earlier than Socrates, go to Parmenides and Heraclitus, which are among the earliest Greek philosophers, they're asking even more fundamental questions than that. They're not asking, how should I live? They're asking, what is being? What is the nature of existence? How do we understand it? How does it manifest in the world? Right? And then they veer away from that very quickly. Plato. You have Plato, who's talking about what we know today as the Platonic ideals. What is beauty? There is perfect beauty. There is a perfect circle somewhere, right? Wherever it is that it is. So this is what we're meeting up with around Hanukkah time. And it is throwing us for a loop. Because we realize that we are not the sole proprietors of sophisticated thought and examined life. They've got it. And guess what? They don't even have a Torah. They figured this out on their own. And they're having more fun. There's sports and stuff. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. So you can understand that for the Jewish people, there is suddenly a tremendous beckoning to come away, and you'll be okay. You're not really compromising anything. And it takes a small band of Jewish rebels, specifically the household of the Kohen Gadol, at the time the family of Hashmonai, who decide, we're not doing this. We will fight. If we have to die on the field of battle, we will die and fight for who we are. But we are not going to simply go quietly into the night of dissipation and assimilation and become Greek. Not after everything that we are and what we've been doing. So they fight. And they wage a rebellion, and it's basically guerrilla warfare. I mean, they don't even have a proper army to be able to wage proper war. And it's nuts. They win. Right? They win the war. They're not expecting to do this, but they win. So the Chachamim recognize in here something very unique. Right? They recognize that, first of all, this is the first time that our very identity is threatened en masse. And it is the first time that we have fought. not to preserve our borders, not to protect our homes and our physical life, which is, if you look throughout the Tanakh, up until this point, those are the wars. What are the wars? The Philistines, they're bothering us. It's Ammon, Moab, they're at our borders. They're oppressing us. They've enslaved us. They're taxing us. Whatever the case may be, we've got to fight back because of logistical problems of having it there. Never do we wage a war that is a war for our souls, right? A war for our very identity, our very life on this earth as people of Israel, as we recognize our own identity. That happens here. It's the first time that it happens. And we did not expect to win. We really did think this might be curtains. And at least we're going to go down trying. Yeah. So the Hachamim see this, they see that we win, and that is why, of course, it's very well known, yes, that the Al Nisim doesn't mention the lighting of the candles. It just says they won the war. And that's it. And then Hidliku Nirot Behatzor Kochecha. That's what it says. They lit candles, right? They lit the lights, not candles. They lit the lights in the Kodesh. So Hachamim recognize our identity was severely threatened. It was existentially in danger. We did, when pressed against the wall, and when I say we, I mean this ragtag group of Kohanim, right, that decide to get together and do this. We do decide that we are not going to go down without a fight. We wage the fight, and we win. And that is seen as the first time that our people cared enough about who we are, that as beckoning and as bright and as shiny as it looked to live a Greek life, and it was very attractive. It still is today. I mean, don't tell me that you go to see, ancient Greek statues and Greek art and not realize, it must have been a very fun time. It was a very good time. We fought against it and we held, and we were able to live to fight another day. It is true that physically, politically, we weren't able to hold. We just weren't. But because we fought at that time for who we were, it became a moed. And we light a light. And every night, our requirement is simply to light one light. We do more because we like the beauty of it and we develop it, but ultimately, it's just to light one light. It's not to light a bonfire. It's not to torch. It is one light. And as Eleanor Roosevelt said, in the face of darkness, one flame banishes the darkness. And so that was to light one flame to recognize, a pasuk that I love to quote with regards to this in Mishlei that Shlomo HaMelech writes, Ner Adonai Nishmat Adam. The flame of God is the soul of man, soul of human beings. And when we recognize that we had essentially been willing to fight for the flame of our soul, and to ultimately fight for what? I mean, what is the nature of our identity? It's not bagels, right? We weren't willing to die on a battlefield for bagels. We were willing to die on a battlefield because whatever group this was, right, this group of Kohanim Gedolim, of the family of Kohen Gadol, recognized that we had a berit, that we had a covenant, and that when you strip everything else away, that is what is left. This strange and awkward pact that our great-grandfather Abraham has with God. And it's God and Abraham's family. Right? It's not even Abraham's disciples. Right? It's not even Abraham's, philosophical descendants and offspring. Intellectual. It's his family. And suddenly, it kicks in for us, and that is what we fight for. The Hachamim said, we light one light for the flame of God that is the soul in all of us, and we remember that. We recognize that as the first time that happened in our history. Not the last time, but the first time. So based on that, when I hear these questions that these are Hanukkah questions that are coming up, more now than ever before. Because you think the Greeks were interesting. Have you seen the world lately? I mean, they're winning. There's no question about it. I mean, what we know today as the Western world is grandfathered by the Greeks. Even Rome, that came in and conquered the known world, they covered themselves in the veneer of Greece because they recognized that Greece was that attractive, that Greece was that sophisticated. And so they renamed all of their gods to be Greek gods. And they established all of their architecture to resemble Greece's architecture. And their clothing resembled Greek clothing. And the Romans genuinely did buy completely into the Greek ideal, to the point that we don't know how to differentiate between them all the time. But they're very different. And that is, that inheritance, right, that legacy is our world today, literally. That's what we live. So, if we recognize that it is profoundly attractive, and we recognize also that we're living in a world in which, what I say, the kind of static, right, that disturbs clarity is all over, because think about the fact that every established organization, system, structure, that the majority of, looking at the world, right? I'm looking at the room, and I'm saying the majority of us, not all of us, can remember systems, structures, organizations of the world that we no longer have at all the way that they used to be today. So simple examples of this, right? Who remembers when something was on television and you had to watch it at the time that it was broadcast? Remember that? Right? For the kids in the room, this used to happen. You had to either be home and watch it at the time it was on, it was over. It was gone. And, maybe they had like an encore presentation or something like that. But otherwise, it was over, right? Or you missed the first 5 minutes, and then all of a sudden they made VHS, and you could record. First there was Betamax, and you decided to record that, and you just set the timer. Who the heck knew how to set the timer? It was a disaster, and then somebody touched the timer, and they were supposed to record. Right? Remember, this is what was going. This is the way we lived, right? And what does that mean, right? This is just one example. There was an external structure that we were completely at the mercy of, that we lived with, and we had to abide by, and this was the nature of our lives. Remember when you had to go to the bank? Right? There's no online on your phone bank. You had to go to the bank, and it was always closed at 2:30 or whatever it was. It was open. It opened at 10, closed at 2:30. Chazaku baruch. Good luck. Tomorrow I missed the bank. I remember growing up, they missed the time of the bank. That's what it was. You had absolutely it was their terms, their rules, how they decided. It was determined for us, and we had to adhere. And we are living in a world today where all of that is dismantled. You decide where you want to bank, when you want to bank, how you want to bank. You decide what you want to watch, where you want to watch, just download it, keep it on the plane, put it on your phone, have some on your phone, have some on your computer, take it over. It's great, right? Well, it's ripped apart and torn down. That's not bad. I'm not saying that's bad or good. I'm simply recognizing that is a shift in the world. So there's a Gemara that says beautifully, it says, En ben David ba, right? Ben David, the Mashiach does not come Ad she'afoch kol ha'malchut leminut, until every aspect of malchut, right, of structure, of authority, and so on, breaks down into its core components. And that's essentially what it is that we're experiencing. I mean, it's basically everything in the world, for all intents and purposes, is geared toward how it works for you, which is great. But it also means that I have to really decide who I am, which is also great. Because it used to be that other people decided. The bank decided, the networks decided, they decided, and I kind of saw how I fit into the system. But now it's a question, it's a really big, serious question that, guess what? Younger people, and us included, are having to be able to answer. Who am I? How will I live my life? What are the elements of meaning that I wish to be able to incorporate into my life? And through which lens do I see my world? And there's no way out of that. You cannot not live in a world in some element of meaning, because that's the way that our brains work. The world is, I was saying to the kids earlier today, right? The world in and of itself is miscellaneous. It doesn't come to us with meaning, but we cannot come to it without meaning. Even if it's something as simple as being hungry and not having breakfast or lunch. When you haven't had breakfast or lunch, you see the world only in one term: food and not food. Everything else falls into the background, and it is lunch, potential lunch, 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 not lunch. That's the whole world. The whole world becomes that. You know it, and I know it, and this is the reality. And we cannot not look at the world in terms of meaning, and that, in that situation, is the meaning. So you replace the food drive with whatever other drive that runs in you at whatever given time. And that's what the world becomes for you. And it is the drive and not drive. It is the thing that I'm looking for and focused on. What is that? Everything else just falls into the background. And so the only question is am I going to just run that way? So, whatever buttons are on or what it is that I'm going to see, or is there going to be an overarching system of meaning that I wish to build? And when we talk about identity, that's for all intents and purposes what we're talking about. Through which lens do you uniquely see the world? What is your world like? So even when we talk about consciousness, if we were to define consciousness in its most sophisticated terms, we would probably just go blank, after. But in a simple way, it really simply means, what is it like to be you in the world? That's your consciousness. What is it like to be you? What is the world, what is the experience of living in this world like for you? That's consciousness. And identity is a systematic kind of structure of that. And what we're looking at in terms of Hanukkah is that we were looking at the Greek one really strongly. And we were ready to take one lens out and replace it with that one. And so today, when everything is being broken down and you're being asked, what do you want it to be? What gender would you like to be? That kind of thing. Everything is, you think the bank is a problem? Literally, the very most core, basic assumptions of what is and what isn't, those are being asked. And it's on the table. And there's nothing that isn't on the table. Yeah, so imagine being thrown into this. And you haven't worked this out yet. And everything is under question. And you've got to figure out the answers to all. So it is helpful in these terms to be able to have some help of scaffolding to determine, how am I going to structure myself? So for our people, for the Jewish people, for Klal Yisrael, we have a 4,000-year-old developing scaffolding and structure, which is good and bad. It's good because it's run the test of time. I mean, we're still here, aren't we? Which is, in and of itself, I've said many times, it is the biggest miracle that we have ever seen, ever will see. This is as big as it gets. Literally, the fact that we are here in this room as Jewish people talking about Hanukkah on this night, it is the biggest miracle that we have ever seen. Bar none, hands down. You will never see anything bigger than this. So that's one good thing. The other side of it is, the bad part is it's 4,000 years old. And it requires regular updates. So we don't get software updates. Right? Here you go, this is Judaism 4.0.3. We don't get that, We've got to kind of structure that on our own. And we're living in a world where everybody's kind of doing their own version of it. And then throw into that mix the hatred of our 4,000-year-old identity. And when I say that, it's not just our ideology, right? This is important. The hatred goes down to the core. Because, forgive me for saying, Hitler did not ask, what do you believe as a Jewish person? How do you live as a Jewish person? Hitler said, you belong to the Jewish people because it's your family, and even if you are very far related, we can't have you around. You're too much trouble. You know what the interesting thing is? We kind of think that too. We don't think that we shouldn't be around. We like being around. But it is the fundamental nature of our identity. Remember I said that the covenant with Abraham is not with Abraham and his ideology. First and foremost, the covenant with Abraham is with Abraham and his family. which you could say, why not relevant right now, right? Let's leave that for a minute and just look at the reality. It is. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not say in the Torah to Abraham Avinu, it's you and your students, Abraham, the ones who learn what you think. No, it's you, Abraham. You, the whole person, the entity, the existence, the soul, Abraham. You and your descendants through whom I see your face in. It's them. And it is very important for us to know that. Why? I'm not asking you to agree with it or not agree with it. I'm just simply recognizing if you're going to look at what Jewish life is, what the people of Israel have been historically, that's at the base. You cannot negate it. That is at the foundation. That's the first layer. So first and foremost, what are we as a people? We are a family. We are a big, elaborate, diverse, opinionated family. And we don't like everybody in the family. Which kind of happens in families. Not anybody in this room. I'm saying the other people have families. There are people that have families. It's just sometimes they don't get along. Sometimes they don't get along. But that's part of the problem. You can't negate the fact that they're family. They're just always there. Right? So that's the first layer. And when the hatred gets to the core, that's where it goes to. It's the people. But on the flip side of that, for all of us, it's important to remember, at the bedrock foundation of who we are, it's the people. Regardless of their ideology, regardless of their beliefs, regardless if they have belief or none, whether they know of it or don't. Right? In other words, you have a person, as an example, you have a person who wakes up today and realizes that their mother's Jewish. Now they want to get married. And they do. They get married. Somebody performs a wedding, right? A rabbi performs a wedding. There's two edim, right? Two witnesses. So and so. Are they married? You bet they are. They don't even know what Jewish means. But they're married. Easy as pie. They need a get. It's a whole other story. You have a person, on the other hand, right, that has been studying Judaism for 47 years, teaches at university, has been to every Friday night dinner they can get themselves invited to, but their mother's not Jewish, nor have they converted. They want to marry. Sorry. Nothing to do with it. You have to become part of the family first. You want to become part of the family? We have ways to do that, right? We have a little pool over here. You dip in. There's some basic things that you kind of do, you know. But the one thing that you have to do, if you want to, is you have to state clearly that you want to become part of the family and there's nothing more that you want in your life. You don't do that, then it's a big issue, but that's the bottom line. You with me? Everything else is overlaid on that. So our law, which is the most precious, it is the length of our days, it is the whole of our life. Overlaid on that. The ethics and morals of Jewish value, as we call them, overlaid on that. The philosophy, overlaid on that. Again, when I say overlaid, I do not mean that it is not important. A real, robust identity is multifaceted, but it's layered. And so now you throw into this mix that I was speaking of, right? Of, it's up to you what you want to be. Enjoy that. And you throw into the mix for a Jewish person the hatred of who you are that has been running almost as long as we are around. Yes, that's part of it. It's an obstacle. It is a difficulty. And yes, we are watching in the world today the turning up of the volume on that. But it's just turning up a volume. It's not that all of a sudden it started coming around when it was never there. It's just turning the volume up. Why? Because they feel a little bit more confident to sing a little bit louder. Which has always been there. Always. Not only has it always been there, it is baked in. If you think that you are going to stop anti-Semitism, and I say this with the greatest respect for everybody who's working on it, more power to you, keep working, you will never, ever, ever eradicate it. An example. The Catholic Church. Anti-Semitic thought has been in a part of Catholic doctrine. Public, clear Catholic doctrine. For the entirety of the church's existence until 1968. When the Pope decided, maybe it's okay that the Jews didn't kill Jesus. Or maybe it's okay that they killed Jesus. I'm not saying that you should read the Gospels, but if you were to read the Gospels, you would see very clearly around the story that tells about Jesus' crucifixion that the Jews said, "Let it be upon us and our children." This is in Luke. There's 4 Gospels, it's different versions of the same story. "Let it be upon us and our children. Take Barabbas. His real name was Bar Abba. Right? There were 2 people in jail. There's Jesus and Barabbas. Barabbas was a bandit and criminal. And the question was, who should be let out of jail? Pontius Pilate is the governor of Jerusalem on behalf of the Romans at the time. And he asks the crowds in Jerusalem, which of course tend to be Jewish at the time, they're Jews. And he says, who should I let out of jail? And they say, let Bar Abba out of jail and kill Jesus. This is the story. That's the story. And he says, well, are you sure? Yes, we're sure. Let it be upon us and our children, and his blood be upon us and our children. Okay, well, I'm washing my hands, Pontius Pilate says. This is in the text. This is baked in for over 1,000 years. It was not until 1968 that they decided, you know something, we were going to stop preaching this. Well, good luck. Good luck after it being in there for so long, entrenched generation after generation after generation, that we are guilty of deicide. Imagine what that means, right? We can kill God. Who can do that? What kind of people do that? So understand that the hatred is not just hatred, it's hatred based on fear. Who has the power to kill God? I mean, no wonder they're in control of everything. We don't know about them. You get it? You hear me? This is baked in. You are not going to change this. Nobody's going to change this. This is there. And the question is, how high is the volume? That's the only question. So you say, well, no, it's not that anti-Semitism word, it's the Muslim anti-Semitism word. Right. You know where they got that from? Russia. Stalin was all for Israel. Russia was the second country to ratify in the United Nations, Israel. He wanted to play against the West. He got, well, we've got Britain here, and we've got, France here. I don't want Britain and France. I'm going to play with the Arabs and this territory. I'm going to play the East against the West, and I'll use Israel. So he ratifies. And he's a great supporter of Stalin. The madman, murderer, right? He's a great supporter of Israel. Until he's not anymore, because it's not politically functional for him. You know where Arafat did his PhD? Moscow. Do you know what he did for his PhD? Blood libels. So these are things that people don't talk about. It is baked in. And my point with this is only, we are not going to change that. So that leaves us with one question. Again, it comes back to the Hanukkah question. Are we willing to fight for who we are in this world? And that is a question of, am I willing to own who I am in this world? Because the hatred will be there. The challenges will be there. So the question is, am I going to be me as best I can in this world, or I'm going to cower my head and fear and live in the shadows so that they may not detect me? Are you with me? So on Hanukkah, it's important to think about that question, because that's what the Moed is about. It's about the fact that at this point in history, it was the first time that we fought rebellion, because we recognized that we were almost an extinct species. We were endangered. And isn't it interesting that that's when we start to care about those species? Oh no!
The bees, right? What species of bees? They're endangered. Oh no, we better worry about them, right? You know how many species have gone extinct on this planet? More than are alive on the planet today. But for some reason, when all of a sudden we recognize that we might lose them, we worry about it. Well, we might lose us. And when I say that, I realize we're indestructible as a people. But that's as a people. There's no guarantees as to how many of us remain. And ultimately for us, it's a question of who do I want to be and whether I want this identity that is my inheritance to be mine. So I'm going to close out with, well, what does it mean then for us? What are some things we can do if we wish to espouse it in order to be able to enhance it? The first thing I really do believe that it is important to be able to consider what you feel about it first. How important is your Jewishness to you? And on that level, I simply mean being part of the family. How important is that to you, to be part of the family? And then the next question is, if it is important to you on whatever level, what does one need to do in order to ensure that they remain within the family? Because there's a lot of static. And it may be that I can hold, will my children hold? Will their children hold? And by the way, it's like that. It comes around like that. I mean, I was in the minyan today again, right? I knew everybody there. I haven't been here for 9 years. I know everybody there. You know how? They were my students in Markai. They were like little kids. And all of a sudden, they're big adults now. Happens like that. So the question is, if I care about it and I want to remain part of the family, what do I do in order to ensure that my branch of the family remains intact? So those are the initial questions. I do believe that it is very important to study Jewish history. Because you don't know Jewish history, you really don't know how you got here. And what brought you here. And what might bring you into the future. And I will say this to whoever it is that's around. You know, we have educators that are here. This is not being taught in our school. It's not being taught here in our schools in any significant way. It's not being taught in the UK in our schools in any significant way. A major part, a pivotal part, central part of a Judaic studies curriculum should, and I believe must, include Jewish history. A robust program of Jewish history. Know how you got here. Know from that how you might proceed. That's number one. Number two, the question is, do I understand what the layers of my identity are as I roughly outline them tonight? It's important for us to know that. Because we get confused. I can't tell you how many people come to me and say, Rabbi, you know, because I don't keep Shabbat, or because I don't eat kosher, or whatever, I'm not part of the Jewish people anymore. No, slow down. Let's orient ourselves to what it means. There's a lot of ignorance. So it's important for us to be able to understand what the layers are. What are the components that come together to be able to form our identity? And to recognize them. To recognize that we are first and foremost a family, and on that we have some of the greatest thought that the world has ever seen. And it is also part of our heritage, and we should be proud of it. Nobody wants to study Talmud. Fine, it's not easy to study Talmud. Do you know that every Jewish comedian on the planet found their humor in the Talmud, ultimately? Where do you think the Jewish humor comes from? It's from the comments and the jokes and the dissonance and so on of the Achamim and how it is that they talk. You have to read 3 pages of Talmud. There's humor throughout the entire thing. Where do you think it came from? As a matter of fact, the majority of our thought, period, came from the Talmud. You think Karl Marx and his thoughts didn't come from the Talmud ultimately? Where do you think they came from? Anyway, how did that happen? Well, he had subtracted some parts, right? So, this is essential. Jewish history, understanding the components of the identity, recognizing our intellectual heritage, and then asking, do I want to remain part of the family? And on the back of that, do I want my children and theirs to be part of the family? It is more fragile than we believe. And I will say this, I'm going to say this with the greatest of humility and honor. Even a community as great as ours cannot be a fail-safe protection against my kids and their kids and their kids remaining part of the family. It's a good one, it helps, but it's not fail-safe. These core elements are fail-safe, in which we ask ourselves, what does it mean to me to have the light of my heritage and identity burn within me? And how do I wish to be able to protect that and cultivate? So those are my thoughts. I appreciate you being here. I'm so grateful to see you, and it's wonderful to be able to share this time with you because it's precious. We'll never have it again this way. And so I wish everybody a Hanukkah Sameach. And I don't know that we want to do questions or anything, but wherever are we doing questions? Well, what's the time?
We're not going anywhere.
Are we not?
It's 9:08.
Okay, so why don't we do 5 minutes? I'll do 5 to 7 minutes of questions. Yeah? Is there any questions? Any questions? There could be no question. Yes, ma'am.
Make it sound very depressing.
I'm so sorry.
To the outside world, beyond us.
Yeah.
And that really shakes us. Because what, in other words, right now, we feel very safe in our community. But what happens when we step out and go to St. Louis, San Francisco, or anywhere else? Where
I really appreciate you asking that question. Thank you for asking that question. Because there's one thing that I've been speaking about. The question was, I make it sound very depressing, which I tend to do, right? And the question is, we feel very safe in our community. What happens when we go outside, right? We go to San Francisco and St. Louis and so on and so forth. Right? What do we do out there? So I appreciate the question. I have not spoken tonight about a component that I often speak about in conjunction with Hanukkah, and that is that the readings that we have in the Torah currently are also important, right? That coincide, and that's about the Yosef. And if there is one symbol of an individual who was able to go to San Francisco and St. Louis in Egypt, and wherever it is, and remain Israel, it's him. And the thing that allowed him to do that was because he had a very strong, a very substantial recognition of self and identity. So really that's what it's about. We, in the community, and this is how we do it, this is what we know how to do, but in the community we allow the community to work as identity. But we less focus on what are you in terms of your consciousness and your identity. How does it run for you? And I'm suggesting that it's important to be able to start to focus on that a bit more. Yeah? And there are ways to kind of do it. I think that Jewish history is a very important part of it. I'm not saying it's the all be all and end, but that's a very important part of it. Right? And that helps. And then it's a question of, if I have a recognition, this is my line that brought me here, do I want to continue that? Or am I content to end it here? Or to say, for me, I'll run it for me, I don't know what's going to be with my kids. People may choose that, and they're free to do so, right? But it is a question that nonetheless, I'm suggesting is worth thinking about, right? In terms of how does we live. So, just to kind of raise the depression a bit, right? Not to more depression, but less depression, I hope, right? Consider this. The very fact that we're here is a remarkable miracle, like I said. And that I believe, and this is only my belief, right? But I believe that is because there's a covenant between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Abraham's family. And if that covenant were not real and manifest, I don't believe that we would be here. And there is also a line, right? When we talk about hope, which is what you're talking about, right? Which helps the depression. To have hope genuinely, to genuinely believe that the future will be bright, that it will ultimately bring us into better points, that's hope. And we definitely live on hope. It's the national anthem, right? The tikva, right? Our word for hope is tikva. The word tikva has a root, and the root of it is kav. And the word kav simply means line, right? Like kav, matayim shalosh, or whatever in Israel, the line. It's a line. And what it means is that we recognize that there is a line that runs through the entirety of history, which is again why I think Jewish history is very important. And what is that line? It is the line of the Creator that nurses His world along. And I will ask you to consider, the world is getting better. I know it sounds crazy after everything I've said. The world is getting better. Which of you would like to go back 100 years and stay there? Visit maybe, it might be interesting, but which of you would genuinely like to go back 100 years on any level and stay there? And if you say me, I would sit down and ask you, really consider that. The world is getting better. Less people are hungry, less people are poverty-stricken, less people are dire and a loss for water. We are a better world. We are a more conscious, more human, sensitive, empathic world. We are. It's the truth. It doesn't mean that things are horrible, are not horrible, that things are bad. It always looks bad. But we are, if you pan out, the net development is on an uptick, not on a downtick. So be hopeful. Don't be depressed. But it means that nonetheless, we need to consider our place in it and how will we run in terms of that line. And it means that we really have to make some serious decisions and choices. Okay.
Living in America is dangerous today.
Dangerous?
Yeah.
I think it's dangerous to live anywhere. Really.
So there's no place for Jewish people to.
No, you can go to Israel, but there was a beautiful dialogue between Ben Gurion and Herman Wouk. Herman Wouk visited Ben Gurion, and Ben Gurion says to Herman Wouk, he goes, "You must come here. You will be free here." And Herman Wouk says, "Free? I mean, you guys are dodging missiles, bombs every other minute. What are you talking about?" He said, "I didn't say safe. I said free." So safe is not all it's cracked up to be. Free is a better question.
So question, it might not be a 1 minute answer, but you spoke a little bit about European politics with Stalin and how that comes into play. A lot of significant Jewish figures over the years, like Herzl, let's say, is from Budapest.
Yes.
They didn't really have any ties to religion. So
Right.
they were tied to the Jewish identity piece, but not any of the religious aspects of it. So, how do you see that, the religion piece playing into it? Because it seems like it's not essential for the Jewish people to stay alive.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Did you hear the question? Yeah? Okay. So like I said, the core of who we are is a national family. Herzl recognized that. Herzl recognized that we are connected that way. And that we need to be able, he believed that we should have a home, right? If we're a family, the family should have a home. It might be Uganda, but in the end, thank goodness, it was our ancestral home, right? That's what he fought for, that's what he believed. And the reality is, if we were going to start picking ourselves up again from dissipation, annihilation, which he was not aware of yet, right? Later, yeah? Well, but nonetheless, he recognized that things were already bankrupt in Europe because otherwise he wouldn't have dealt. He saw the Dreyfus affair, right? He saw this going on. He was very concerned about it. He recognized we are a national family, we need a home. And if we're going to start picking ourselves up, that is the foundational layer. So what do I see that as? I said, yeah, that's where it starts. And thank goodness for Herzl, right? He did some great things. But it's not where it ends. Like I said, we are much more complex than just members of the family. What kind of family are we? What is the nature of our heritage? What is our intellectual, repository and treasure? Yeah, those are real parts of who we are. And part of it is practice. It is, right? So you choose, or somebody chooses, I don't want to do the practice. That's a discussion to be had, right? Whether it's valuable, not valuable, whether you recognize it's part of the wholeness of the Jewish people and what has brought us along all of the way. Yeah, or not? Yeah, that's a question that has to be recognized. But it is certainly a layer that cannot be denied that has been part of our people for thousands of years, right? So if I'm going to look at what it is that I'm going to build in my people, I'm going to start with the foundations. And the foundations are, we are a national family. I don't know about everything else. I'm not attacking it from the higher layers. I'm attacking it from the foundations, which is what he did, which is probably why it was successful. Yeah, but that's what I say. So those other components I look at as the complexity of our identity. There are various components of who we are, which really bring the beauty and the robustness of who we are. Yeah, so that's what. Yeah.
Do you think the Jewish Hellenists, or most of the Jewish Hellenists, were trying to jump ship away from full and Jewish identity? Were they trying to have both ways and integrate?
I don't think they were having it both ways. I think that they genuinely believed that the resource of Jewish life was running real thin, and it wasn't providing for them what they believed they wanted and needed in this world. And I don't think it's the first time we've heard that. And they didn't have a recognition of how they were going to be able to have that within the native elements of their home, so they went outside, because it was looking very good over there. I don't think that they were interested in incorporating it. Maybe they were interested in keeping the bagels, but not much more than that. Okay. Thank you.